Hey there, sports fans. Welcome back. Another episode of the Brew and Shaver Sportscast. I'm joined with my always research oriented, sports crazy, particularly SEC football
That's
co
right.
host, Darren Shavers. How you doing, Darren?
I, I mean, do I have to answer that? It's week one. It's here. We've been talking about it for what would that be? Probably, let's see, 46 weeks, something like that, since the last time we had college football. And now we don't have to talk about it anymore. It is football time. So I am
Congrat-
ready.
Congratulations, my friend. Vanderbilt is undefeated and tied for
That's right.
first place in the
That's right.
SEC.
That's exactly right. Here you go. I've celebrated it all week because it's the only time I'll be able to say it. I've got this hanging up at my desk.
Beautiful. I love the optimism.
That's right.
If this podcast thing doesn't work out, you, my friend, should think about being a professional licensed counselor.
Exactly.
Tonight, we're concluding our previews of SEC teams because, as Darren just mentioned, this is week one. We had quite a start last weekend with a
Yep.
major upset as
Oh yeah.
Florida State fell to Georgia Tech.
Oof.
Georgia Tech looked great. And didn't you love what the coach said afterwards? Run the
Ball.
ball.
Exactly. That was
He's
fantastic.
speaking SEC.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Tonight, we're going to preview Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. Let's get right into it, Darren. Florida, which has had quite a rocky road,
Yeah.
you could say since Billy Napier's arrival, but actually the year before.
Yeah.
3 straight years losing seasons. Now, the first one was before Billy Napier,
Hmm.
but the 2 years he's been there, 2 losing seasons. He's 11-14 overall. Last year was 5-7. They missed a bowl game for the first time since 2017, and they have arguably the toughest schedule in the country.
Absolutely.
And we'll look at that in a few minutes. But on offense, there is some hope, Darren.
Mhm.
Graham Mertz returns 3,000
Absolutely.
yards passing, 20 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. When you look at Graham Mertz's development and what he has around him, what are you expecting from this Florida offense?
Well, I think the offense is going to be an area where there's some optimism going into this first week, especially. They returned 64% of their production. As you said, I think even the optimistic people of the Gator faithful that were excited about Graham Mertz. I don't know that they expected him to have the season he had last year. So your hope is, as a Florida fan, that he'll repeat that, and not just repeat that, but grow on that, show even more command of the offense. And I don't think we really have a reason to doubt that. So at least not right now, but hopefully that'll be the case. One of their biggest concerns is the offensive line. That seems to be some trouble again, especially the right side of the line. People have come out of their scrimmages being a little bit of concern, showing some concern about that. They've had some injuries there and some difficult. They lost 2 guards, they gained 2 tackles. They picked up a freshman from USC. So there's been some moving parts. And even though there's some concern on the right side of the line, Pro Football Focus, which grades out everything from every team through the entire all of college football, has them as a top 10 offense. If that right side, they're assuming that the right side is going to correct what they need to correct. So it's a top 10 offensive line for them if everything works out. And they've got a strong receiver room. Of course, they lost Ricky Purcell, but they picked up Eugene Wilson. They picked up Dyke and Badger. They've got Zeppier as a tight end, and also Boardingham, who is a tight end. It's an All-American, a freshman All-American, and the basically after the 2 scrimmages, any podcast or local radio that you listen to, even if it's in podcast form or whatever, his name was brought up. They are excited about what he has shown throughout fall camp and his development. They needed him to have an impressive fall camp, and he's done it. So there is some there's some excitement there. the one.
What about
Go ahead.
running backs, Darren? You talk about so Trevor Etienne
Hmm.
transferred to Georgia.
Hmm.
So what does that leave? Montrell Johnson in the backfield coming back. Do they have anybody else?
Well, they've also got Trayon Webb and Katie Daniels. Going into fall camp, Katie Daniels looked like kind of the number two, but Trayon Webb had a nice fall camp. And looks like he is really going to see some time on the field. And also, as of recording time, there is a little bit of concern that Montrell Johnson has a knee issue and is day to day. So that's some concern because you start out with Miami, and like you said, we'll talk about some scheduling a little bit. Typically, if you're starting running backs is day to day going into the season, if you've got an easier game, that doesn't give you as much concern. But you're going into the game, you're going into. He is listed as day to day, and also. Freshman Jaden Ball is going to see some time on the field. He is a big guy that runs big, but also a very important thing for a freshman. He has shown significant gains and significant strength in pass protection. And you can't beat that if you can get that out of your, on the college level, if you can get that out of your freshman running back, that's an impressive thing. And he's shown that throughout fall camp. So there's some concern in the backfield or in the running back room because Montrell Johnson is day to day, but they've also got a deep running back room, so that lessens that a little bit.
On the defensive side of the ball, not a very good year last year for
No.
Florida. They ranked near the bottom. Most of the defensive staff, I
Mm.
think, was fired. Although
Yeah.
Napier brought back Austin Armstrong, the defensive coordinator,
Hmm.
uh, which raised some eyebrows. But
Right.
they also hired Ron Roberts, who has held that position at Auburn, was
Hmm.
at Baylor as well. Is that going to be enough to get this defense on the right track? I'm looking at the starters they lost in the secondary. Looking at you know they lost their all SEC defensive end to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
What's this defense going to look like this year?
Well, that's where people are the most concerned. Now, I will say, um, even though they didn't have the best year last year, they are returning 60% of their defensive production. So even though that might not be the greatest of production, it's at least time on the field. It's something to build up. There's game time experience there. They also lost Scooby Williams at linebacker, who went to A&M, but they brought in, I think it's Triquez. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I apologize if I'm not, but Triquez Bridges from Oregon. And they also have Lamar James at linebacker, who is a positive thing. I tell you, they were excited about Jamari Lyons on the D line, and he is now out for the season. He was hurt during fall camp. And so that's a little bit of a blow where they didn't need it. But Cam Jackson is returning. He's going to be a big piece on the defensive line. And you've got Jordan Castell and Asa Turner on safety. Asa Turner came over from Washington, and then Cormani McClain came over from Colorado. But honestly, as one of the safeties, but honestly, there's been a little bit of a mixed review about what his camp was like. So that's going to have to kind of see. They're going to have to see that flesh out on the field in real time to see exactly what he brings to that defensive backfield.
A lot of questions for Florida.
Yep.
We've been a little surprised at the struggle that Napier has had.
Yeah.
Napier is a good coach, but for
Hmm.
whatever reason, it hasn't clicked yet at
Right.
Florida. Now he's still putting the pieces together, but the
Yep.
Florida faithful, I don't think they're going to be
Hmm.
patient with
No.
another bad season. And unfortunately, Napier has the odds stacked against him with the
Yep.
schedule that
Yep.
Florida was given. Let's go ahead and look at that schedule. They start off this weekend coming
Sure.
up with a huge matchup against Miami.
Hmm.
Mario Cristobal is still trying to live up to expectations down in Miami. This is a huge game for both programs
Yep.
as they try to set a tone for the rest of the season. So a tough start right
Yeah.
off out of the gates for Florida. Then they have Stanford, which should be a win. Uh,
Samford.
Sanford. Did I
Yeah,
say Sanford?
you said
Did I say
Stanford.
Sanford?
You said Stanford. They are not playing the
Stanford.
card.
I had Sanford and Son on the brain.
Which is
Wow,
a
wow,
na,
wow,
na, na,
wow.
da. Yeah, now that's a great thing to have on the brain.
So, but sometimes what is on the brain
Yep.
comes out differently when it leaves
Mhm.
my mouth.
Yeah. Well.
So apologies to Samford. They will play Florida in the second game of the season, and then they got we're waiting to see what the Aggies look like this
Right.
year. We've talked about the pieces are there, but Mike
Mhm.
Elko's first year,
Mhm.
what is that going to look like? So don't know. Mississippi State, they're putting pieces together with Jeff Lebby, and so I don't know what those games are going to look like against
Yep.
Florida. UCF, Tennessee. Ooh, there's a tough one.
Yep.
Um, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. That's a tough 4 game stretch. I was going to say before the season and Florida State, but after
Nah, but we don't know about that now.
the debacle in Dublin.
Yeah.
Um, so
That was well
yeah,
done, by the way. That was very nice.
so Florida.
Yeah, you look at that Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss stretch. I mean, thankfully they've at least got a couple of those games at home. But I mean, you got LSU and Ole Miss at home. Ugh, I mean, we don't even know how much of an advantage that's going to be. The swamp is always an advantage, but still, you know, and at least one of your away games is Mississippi State. Not that Starkville is ever an easy place to play; that doesn't exist. But it's better than having to go to Baton Rouge for a night game at that point in the season if that were an away game. So that's a tough stretch. I really feel like the Miami, the UCF and the Kentucky games is kind of what will that's what will determine their year. Because I think, obviously they'll beat Sanford. I think they've got a shot at A&M because we just don't know what they're going to look like right now. And obviously we think they have a shot at Mississippi State. I think the UCF and Miami games could really set an ugly tone where, we're talking about an interim head coach by game, 8 or 9. If that kicks it off the rails. However, if those go well, and even with that nasty stretch of Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, if you bookend that with a win uh, home with Kentucky and then beat Florida State in Tallahassee, then the Florida faithful might be a little bit more. That's a nice 6-6. It's not what you want, but it's still a nice 6-6. So,
Looking at the schedules, I think 6-6 would be.
oh,
You could say that was a successful season.
absolutely, with this kind of
It,
schedule,
yeah, you don't want to be there, but
no,
with that schedule, that
yep,
would be impressive.
absolutely,
Well, let's move up the road from Florida and let's travel up on I-75 to Lexington, Kentucky, the Bluegrass, and let's talk a little bit about what Mark Stoops has brewing for this season. He's got a new offensive coordinator in Bush Hamden coming over
hmm
from Boise State and a new starting quarterback. There's a theme here, Darren.
yeah,
Does it feel like every year we talk about Kentucky, we're talking about a new
yeah,
starting quarterback?
that's exactly right. We're 3 for 3.
They have Brock Vandergrift from Georgia, who will be their starting quarterback this year. And this kid's upside is unreal.
Through the
The
roof.
talent is there. His statistics, when you look at what he did in high school, is absolutely amazing. He was
hmm
he was part of Georgia's team for those 2 national title runs. Um, he's a dual threat quarterback. If he takes off this year, Darren, what's the ceiling for Kentucky?
That to me is if he comes out because he's got 2 years. Even though he doesn't have 2 years of starting experience, he's got 2 years in the game. And even if you're doing it in practice, especially if you're doing it in practice at Georgia, because his name is Brent Ciancia, I think, that does one of the preview magazines. It's called Pick Six Previews. He refers to Georgia throughout his magazine as the NFL's 33rd team. So if your 2 years of experience of practice is with the NFL's 33rd team, that's some really nice practice experience. experience, even if you didn't get to do it much in the game. So, I mean, he's had opportunity for the game to slow down. They've got a veteran offensive line. The offensive line has over 8,000 snaps of experience that can protect him. I think if he looks like one of those people that can just take the top off the defense, and then when you decide to back up and not let him do that, he can gouge you for 20 yards with his feet, and that becomes fluid for him. I, this could be an incredible year for Kentucky.
Who's he going to hand the ball off to? Ray Davis, of course, is
Yeah.
gone. They got this kid from Ohio State. Is he going to be their number one?
He is slated to be their number one. However, he is hurt. It looks like he's going to be out for a couple of weeks. That just happened in the last, I would say, at time of recording, in the last 5-6 days. It's I believe, if I remember correctly, it's a hand, so it's not a knee or an ankle or anything like that, but it is a hand. But it looks like it's going to hold him out for 3 to 4 weeks right now. But they also have Denny Sumo. Who is a running back that they're very, very excited about, and actually his name, I believe, is Denny Sumo Carnbay. I think I'll get all of it in there, that they're excited about, and he's obviously going to see some time in that backfield, especially with Trayanum being out for 2 to 3 weeks or 3 to 4 weeks. But they're excited about that backfield, and then their receivers. Whew, they've got a receiver room. It's a stacked receiver room. It's not something you're used to hearing about Kentucky. So
Looks like that will be a strength for them on
yeah,
offense, particularly with Key and Brown both
yep,
returning,
yep,
and the pieces they have around them. They look to be a strength.
yep.
So we've said this before, Darren, with other teams. So much weighs on the quarterback position.
Mm-hmm.
If Vandergrift plays like he's capable of playing,
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky could surprise a lot of people this year. However, if he plays poorly,
Yep.
Kentucky's looking at a tough season.
Well, and I think we saw that last year. You can't put it all on the quarterback's shoulders last year, but and man, I say the name wrong every time. What's the last name?
It's not Levis.
That's the only name that's coming to my mind right now as we speak. I can't come up with anything.
It's
But
not Will Levis.
No. Oh, what's his? Anyway, from NC State, whatever his last name is, he transferred. There was so much expectation, and it just never meshed last year.
Somebody's watching right now and typing in the
And-
comments, "You dummies!" It was,
and they're screaming, and they're screaming his last name, and I wish we could hear it, because the only thing coming to my mind is Levis and Muschamp, and neither of those are right. So
no, not at all. Well, how about we move away from
yeah,
offense and go to the defensive side of the
let's
ball,
do.
where defensive coordinator Brad White has his entire defensive line returning,
Absolutely.
including first team All SEC defensive end Deion Walker,
Yep.
5.5 sacks. The kid is a force on the defensive line. I think this is going to be a strength for Kentucky, that front.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to cause a lot of problems for
Yep.
other teams. In addition to that, they've added some players at linebacker as well, including Jamon Dumas Johnson from Georgia, who
Yep.
was a Butkus Award finalist.
Yep.
How often do you get one of those in the
To
transfer
come in,
portal?
yeah. And to get they had Derek Jackson and J.J. Williams coming back, adding Jamin Dumas Johnson, and you get to have that kind of a linebacker core that is protected by an incredible defensive front line. That can eat up blocks, that can cause disruption in the backfield, can eat up those lanes to allow space for the linebackers, and you mentioned Deion Walker. I've heard two different sports personalities talk about the fact that it will not surprise them at the end of the year if he's an All-American, maybe even first team All-American, that he is that disruptive. And when you have the pieces around him on the line and then at linebacker that you have, that he could really throw up some serious numbers this year.
A lot of high expectations
Yep.
for Kentucky heading into the season. Let's take a look at their schedule. They start off with Southern Miss,
Mhm.
4 straight home games.
Yeah,
Pretty nice.
that's pretty
Uh,
awesome.
First SEC game follows against South Carolina. A big one with Georgia coming to town. Last year, I think Kentucky was undefeated when they went to Athens and
Mhm.
just got shellacked
Yeah.
down there. They got the Ohio Bobcats from the MAC coming into Lexington, which you can't say that's just going to be a gimme game. That
No.
And then you have Ole Miss. They have to go to Oxford. It'll be a tough environment. They've got Vanderbilt coming, and out of deference to you, I won't say anything about that. Then they travel to Florida. They got Auburn at home. They travel to Tennessee. Ouch.
Yeah,
Then they've got the Murray State Racers
there
coming
you
to
go.
town. Then they travel to Austin for the first time. That's going to be a tough one. And
Yep.
then they've got their rivalry game against
Mhm.
Louisville to close out the season.
And it's interesting. You look at those first 6 games. I think a realistic expectation is 4-2. And I think with as much preseason hype as there's been, I think there's going to be a little bit of the Big Blue Nation that's got a little bit of a rumbling, especially if they get blown out again by Georgia, and let's say they also get blown out by Ole Miss, which you don't want. But those two teams are going to be, I think, something really elite this year. Both of those teams. I, I think what's really going to decide their season and set the have we met expectations is that back half, those last 4 games. You got to go to Tennessee, you got to go to Austin. Those are tough. Outside of that, you maybe pick up one of those, which not saying anything negative about Tennessee or Texas. Both of those being on the road are rough, but pulling off a sneak road win against one of those teams, I think is a better shot than beating a Georgia or something like that in the first half. So you sneak up and beat one of those teams, and then win the games you're supposed to. With the preseason hype that they're getting, next thing you know, you're sitting at 9-3 with this schedule, and that's a dadgum good year. So I think they have a real possibility, and I think that back half of the schedule, what do you do at Florida? What do you do at Auburn? What do you do, or what do you do with those 2 games? And then what do you do in Knoxville and in Austin? I think that kind of sets their. What do we look at? How has this year gone for Kentucky?
I agree, Darren. 8, 9 wins is realistic for this Kentucky team.
Absolutely.
We'll see how that pans out. Let's go over to the East to South Carolina and check in with our friend Shane Beamer
Hmm.
and the Gamecocks to see what they have going on. A quarterback battle, it
Yeah.
appears. I think that we were talking before the show, Darren. The offensive coordinator seems to really like Lenora Sellers,
Hmm.
while Beamer keeps talking up Robbie Ashford.
Exactly.
What is going on behind the scenes? We don't know.
Yeah,
We
we don't
just
know.
we just hear what they want us to hear. So
Exactly.
your guess is as good as mine. But they did bring a run game coordinator back to Columbia, and tight end coach Sean Elliott.
Hmm.
Why bring him back, Darren?
Well, I think they just had no choice. Their coordinator high last year would have been seen as one of the worst in the conference if it wasn't for Sam Pittman in Arkansas. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I think they made a necessary adjustment, bringing him as the run game coordinator.
Speaking of run game, they brought in a transfer from Arkansas, familiar name, Rocket
Yeah.
Sanders. How do you think he's going to do, South Carolina? Is that going to be the answer to some of their run game
Well,
problems?
I think they think it is. I mean, last year they had the worst rushing offense in the country, or in the conference rather, not in the country. And I think bringing him in, getting him to come to Columbia, they felt like that was a major victory. And so they bring in a run game coordinator, somebody that can basically just scheme for him. Here's what will make him successful, and I think that's part of the push there of that run game coordinator. So I think the thing is, what Rocket Sanders did we get? He fought injury last year, and what's that recovery process like that? And I mean, that's still the question. Even people that have watched practices and fall scrimmages and stuff, that's still the question they have. Which Rocket Sanders are we going to see on the field? And it's just like we were kind of talking about with quarterback in Kentucky. I think if you get him to establish himself as he has in the past, outside of last year, I think he could make a pretty dramatic difference for this team because the run opens the pass, as they say. So
If the offensive line can block
yeah,
for him, there's
yeah,
some big questions on that offensive line, and
yep.
you're right about the run opening the pass, but to the counter of that is, look, if you can't pass the ball,
Right,
then
absolutely.
these teams are going to load the box on
Yep,
you.
yep,
So it's a lot of questions with South Carolina, a
yep,
lot of changes.
mhm.
Uh, South Carolina's never been at the top of the SEC in
No,
terms of programs. Steve Spurrier had success there.
yep,
Shane Beamer has had some success there, but it's a tough road to
yeah,
travel. Can Beamer right the ship? Are the fans there going to be patient, satisfied with where they are now with a little bit of improvement? Are the expectations there the same as, say, an Alabama or a
right.
Georgia or even an LSU? No, I don't think so. I don't
No.
think they're expecting a national championship every year.
But I will say this, and I guess we'll talk about this a little bit more when we look at their schedule. I do think the fan base there is impatient enough that a second season without a bowl game, without a postseason appearance, would not go well. And
Yeah.
especially if you're 6, 8, 9 games into the season and you're statistically still the worst rushing offense or maybe the worst passing offense or yeah, if some of those things are additional components. I mean, they've been patient with Shane Beamer, and like you said, he's had some success, but there comes a point where it's like, okay, what are we doing here?
On the other side of the ball, defensive coordinator Clayton White has 8 starters
Yep.
back, including some transfers. One
Hmm.
of those starters coming back is Debo Williams, all SEC
Oh yeah.
performer last year. There's optimism on the defensive side of the ball that they can get some
Hmm.
stops. They can help the offense out, especially if the offense struggles.
Hmm.
What do you expect from South Carolina's defense this season?
I think they're going to be strong and they're going to be physical. I think everyone you hear talk about what this team has looked like, the defensive squad has looked like during fall practice. They've taken on the personality of Debo Williams. He's been very vocal. He's very much stepped into an enormous leadership role, and they've taken on his personality, his physicality a lot during this fall camp. A quick little funny story I heard Shane Beamer tell. He said, I think it was practice toward the end of last week. Debo Williams met. No, I almost said Lenore Sellers. Oh, it was Rocket Sanders. They were doing some ones-on-ones, and they met in the gap. And Rocket Sanders looked like won the battle. And he said, "Now, Debo would tell you that he slipped, but I reminded him quickly that it looked like Rocket got the best of him." And then the next 3 plays, Debo just absolutely destroyed whoever had the football. I mean, it looked like they had insulted his mother. And somebody from the offensive side of the ball, one of the coaches, came over to Beamer and said, "That's your fault, right? You." So that's kind of his physicality and how personal he takes the game.
Yeah.
And this squad seems to have kind of taken on that personality. So I think they're going to be strong and pretty intimidating, but I think the question for them is what is the offense going to look like? Because you can be strong and intimidating if you're not exhausted. If the other team is not constantly, if the other team's offense is not constantly on the field, you can pull that off. But if you're on the field 93 plays a game, that gets tough in a hurry as a defensive team.
Let's take a look at South Carolina's schedule for this season. They start off with the Old Dominion Monarchs.
Mm-hmm.
Should be an opening day win
Should be.
before they travel to Lexington to face Kentucky in a tough game. Then they
Mm-hmm.
have LSU coming to town.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have is that Alcorn State?
Yeah. No, that is Akron.
Oh, Akron.
Yeah.
Okay. The yeah, I
Yeah.
think the color scheme threw me there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Akron. So the MAC is coming to town. Then they got Ole Miss coming to town before they travel to Tuscaloosa and
Mhm.
Norman back to back. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
Then they've got the Aggies before
And
they travel to Nashville and Missouri. The Wofford Terriers are
yeah.
coming to town. Uh, Hopefully that will give them a win before they face in-state rival
Yeah.
Clemson to close out the season.
Yeah.
What do you think about this schedule?
To me, this obviously is nowhere near the level of schedule that Florida has. That being said, when you think about the challenges South Carolina has, this is a very tough schedule for them. I mean, I think you don't want to be overly pessimistic, but I think it's realistic and a possibility that as a South Carolina fan, you have to really consider as maybe looking at it through realistic eyes that they bring A&M. A&M comes to town, they host A&M, and they've only got 2 wins. They're 2-5. I mean, I think it's very realistic that they go to Lexington and lose to Kentucky, they lose to LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma. If you're 2-5 when A&M comes to town, I, I don't know what that looks like for this team, and I don't know what it looks like for Shane Beamer. Because if you lose to A&M, you're 2-6. You get that win against Vanderbilt, duh. Even though hopefully for Vanderbilt that's not the case, because I think that's a game that could be the please save our coach bowl. That could be what we're looking at by the time that game comes around for both teams. But then you got Missouri, and I mean this could be a 3-4 win season for the South Carolina team. You don't want to see that for Shane Beamer or for this team, but I think that's at least possible. And so they have to win the games they're supposed to win, and then beat a Vanderbilt, maybe sneak one in against an A&M, and beat Clemson, and that can make the difference and get them to a bowl game.
Yeah. No easy roads in the
No,
SEC.
absolutely not.
Darren, you've been patient. Let's move on and talk about your beloved Commodores.
Speaking of pothole-filled dirt roads, let's.
Clark Lee returns as head coach of Vanderbilt. He's has a record of 2-22 in SEC play, 9-27 overall.
I
And
don't hear
I'm not trying to make light of
it.
anybody's misfortune. We talked before, college coaching's tough. In some programs, it's even tougher
Yep.
than other ones. On offense, they've got major changes, a new offensive coordinator. They brought Tim Beck in
Yep.
over from New Mexico State. They also hired the former head coach
Yeah.
of New Mexico State, Jerry Kill, as an analyst. What has that done? Well, that's brought in quarterbacks. They brought in Diego Pavia
Pavia.
and
Yep.
Blaze Berlowitz,
Yes.
coming in from New Mexico State. I think they even got a receiver coming in from.
Yes, they do.
So is Vanderbilt becoming New Mexico State East?
That's correct. New Mexico State Northeast is what they've done, because also they brought in the offensive line coach Klanakis from New Mexico State as well. But my understanding is from tempo and practice and overall organization, it is really improved things, because truthfully the approach that they've taken is Jerry Kill is the offensive head coach, and Clark Lee is the defensive head coach. Now, I'm not saying that this year is going to be this, oh my goodness, we can't believe that this is a 6-win team kind of year. But I will say the last time that Vanderbilt had any success, went to a bowl game, still didn't have a winning season because they lost their bowl game, but didn't finish last in the conference, was when Derek Mason brought in Andy Ludwig. And Andy Ludwig, as offensive coordinator, was the offensive head coach. Derek Mason was defensive coordinator and defensive head coach. And everybody focused on their specialty. Those were the back-to-back bowl game years during the Mason era. So at least he's mimicking a formula that has shown success in the past. That being said, bringing this offense, Diego Pavia plays with his hair on fire, reckless abandon, and that's cute when you're at New Mexico State. But when you're lining up against Texas and LSU and Alabama, that's how you end up missing every 2 games out of every 4 because you're hurt. So I think they've tried to tamp some of that down. They brought in Nate Johnson from Utah, and surprise of all surprise, because apparently they didn't watch game film. He can't throw the ball, so so he hasn't done. He couldn't. I can't remember the quarterback's name from Florida that is doing well in the NFL, but he was awful. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from a couple of years ago. That is Nate Johnson. He's got incredible size, incredible speed. But you line up a guy 6 yards in front of him and say hit him in the numbers, and he hits somewhere 15 yards downfield. So that's why Diego Pavia has become the starter, and hopefully will do really, really well. They've got great receivers for him, better receivers for him to throw to, and some good tight ends. They even brought a tight end from New Mexico State in addition to the wide receiver, and they brought Fungi over from Texas Tech, who had some good numbers at Texas Tech. So they've got a pretty decent receiver room.
What are they going to do about this offensive line that ranked near the bottom of D1 programs?
They brought in some grad transfers. They changed the offensive line coach, was an absolute necessity, and just hearing Vanderbilt podcast people talk, the hope is that the formations and the pre-snap dressing, as they say, will create enough pause on the defensive side that it'll, as these guys continue to adjust, the offensive line will have a couple of steps on the defense. And they're hoping that'll create more protection. That combined with an improved line will create more protection. That all being said, this is the worst offense in the SEC 8 of the last 12 years. But regardless of formation and scheme, 8 of the last 12 years, this is the worst offense in the SEC. And again, I will say the only 4 years they weren't was when Andy Ludwig was there as basically the offensive head coach. When you had one guy that was a proven offensive mind that had total control of the offense. So I guess find some hope in that.
Unfortunately, last season, the defense was not any better than the offense, ranked near the bottom among Power 5 schools. There's a lot to replace, but when the defense is that bad, maybe that's a good thing.
Yep.
So they've filled in some question marks with transfers, but I think the biggest thing for the defense is Clark Lee saying, "Hey, I'm a defensive guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take control of the defense." What are you expecting, Darren, as a Vanderbilt fan? Is this a good move on Clark Lee's part?
Well, historically, again, working specifically with Vanderbilt history, when a head coach decides to take over the defense, there has been a marked improvement. Woody Woodenhofer did it in the 90s. Derek Mason did it, and now Clark Lee has done it. Woody didn't take his team to a bowl, but he had back-to-back 5-win years where they were sitting on the edge of getting that 6th win. So there was a marked improvement there. So I think that's, again, a little bit of hope there. They bring back C.J. Taylor and DeRicky Wright in the backfield. Langston Patterson is a machine at linebacker, so they're excited about him. Prince Kali from Notre Dame was injured, had a concussion he just didn't get over last year, but has shown it has been on the field, is over that concussion, and has shown some definite improvement. And then you've got Linus Zunk and Devin Lee on the defensive line that have had really great fall camps. So, I mean, there's some pieces there. I just don't even think there's a way to even begin to know what they're going to look like on either side of the ball. It's going to be really interesting.
It will be. Let's go ahead and look at their schedule.
I don't want to. I don't. Don't make me. Here, you go ahead.
Well, they start off with Virginia Tech coming to town. You're not too excited about the Hokies coming to town?
I am not. I think that's a scary start. I think it scares me. I'll just leave it at that. How's that?
Followed by a visit from Alcorn State. I think I got the right A that
That's
time.
right. That's right.
I believe that's Steve McNair's alma mater,
Yes.
Alcorn State. They've got Georgia State, the Panthers.
Mhm.
Trivia question. What's the name of Georgia State's mascot?
I'll let you answer.
I believe it's Pounce.
Yes, Pounce the Panther, right? Is
Mhm.
that, yep.
Yeah, he first made an appearance in an old Dukes of Hazzard episode when they. No,
Episode 186, they actually jumped him. That's what.
they go to Missouri to face the Tigers, and they've got Alabama coming to town. Nashville's a great place to visit.
Yeah.
Kentucky on the road, Ball State at home. They've got the Longhorns coming to town. That's going to be an interesting
Yeah.
matchup.
Definitely. I mean, it's not going to be
On
an
paper.
interesting. It's not going to be an interesting matchup, but it's going to be a fun time for people that make the trip from Austin.
They go on the road to Auburn, South Carolina, coming to town. They go down to Baton Rouge November 23rd, and then they finish up with a friendly rivalry game, in-state competition. They go down to Knoxville. No, they've got Tennessee's coming to
Tennessee
Nashville.
comes to town. Yep.
So look at that. The Volunteers are coming to town.
Yeah. Yay.
Darren, I'm looking for some silver lining here.
Yeah.
The thing, Ball State, maybe.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about it. Truthfully, if this the formations, the window dressing prior to the snap, there's going to be times when they have 3 running backs in the backfield. There's going to be times when they have 3 tight ends on the field. So they're going to do some things that hopefully catches some defenses off guards. If you just want to be blindly optimistic as a fan, they win against Alcorn State, Ball State. They sneak the one in Georgia State. They sneak the one against Virginia Tech, and then maybe sneak up on a South Carolina and catch an Auburn off guard. That is the only path that exists to 6 wins. I don't think there's any other. I don't think 6 wins are going to happen, but that's the only path to 6 wins. I don't think they're going to sneak up on Kentucky and Lexington again. That happened 2 years ago. I think Mark Stoops will threaten people's families the week going into that game before he lets that happen again. They're not sneaking up on Alabama or Tennessee or Texas. It's just not happening. So that's the only path that possibly exists to 6 games.
I want to support you, Darren, and not do anything to crush optimism or hope. So
just let me have it, man. Just let me have it.
No, you've suffered for long, my friend, and I feel for you.
Thank you.
Week 1 kicks off this week. It's a great slate of college football games. Clear your calendar every Saturday here on out. There's great games every weekend. Remember to hit that like button, that subscribe button. Keep up to date with everything that we do. Every once in a while, it happens. I'm going to tell you it's going to happen. There's going to be a bonus episode released, and you will be immediately notified if you have liked or if you subscribe to this show. And tell a friend, hey, here's a couple of guys. They don't always know what they're talking about, but sometimes they're entertaining. Why don't you subscribe to their show? It's totally fun, and we can sit and make fun of them and talk about it.
That's right.
No, you shouldn't do that. You should make fun of people. Come on, Darren. We're supposed to be kind, right?
Well, if you're watching, we're good. It doesn't really, we're good, whatever the reason.
Look, right now, we're just so excited that football is back. You look forward to those games. We'll be back next week to talk about all the action from this weekend. So until then, you take care.
Have a great week. Thank you for making the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast your go-to sports show. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our show if you haven't already. Your feedback is important. Let us know what you think about this week's show. Send an email to brewandshavers@gmail.com or text to our text line 318-390-3599. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again for listening to the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast. See you next week.